meetings, please provide a first and last name prior to speaking in the public comment period. To limit disruption and ensure the efficient operation of our meeting, your first and last name given cannot include a message or violate our rules of decorum. If your registered name doesn't meet this requirement, then our staff will use the chat feature to gather that information from you. If you're unable to give a first and last name that meets this requirement, our staff is happy to direct you to another forum because your message is important to us. Amanda Lau from our staff is helping to moderate the meeting today. She will be messaging with the attendees to coordinate. Please monitor the chat screen for information and/or feel free to message our staff with any questions. Robert Nutzman, another staff member, will be calling the names of those who wish to comment and unmuting lines. When Robert unmutes your line and lets you know it's your turn, please state your first and last name, just as you would in our in-person meetings. Indicate the topic you're speaking on, and the 2-minute timer will begin. At the 2-minute mark, we'll announce time, and your microphone will be muted. We will now open our general comment period. And Bobby, please start with our first comment, if we have anybody that would like to do so.
Good afternoon, Board Chair. We have some speakers today. Our first speaker will be Casey Mcdonough, and then followed by Tony Summerred, and then Dale Rice. Casey, you are now unmuted.
All right. This is the first time I've used this. So can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I'm commenting on the Utah Theater sales agreement.
I can hear him, but cut. I'm not sure if that's just me or everybody else. It's spotty.
He didn't sound that spotty to me. So maybe
Okay.
if he starts talking again,
Here we
and then
go.
we can.
So just
try again, sir. Thank you.
As a test, this is Casey Mcdonough, and you said it was spotty.
Casey?
How is that coming through?
Better, thank you.
Okay. So I was commenting on the Utah Theater sale agreement. You guys probably saw my email, and so I'm just going to make a brief statement about my same concerns that deal is, I guess, I don't think it accommodates for all the value that is being given away. I can't track down one comment or one of the criticisms that was made in a Utah Stories article about the developer, I guess, saying they can't do the affordable housing. So I'd appreciate if the board could address that in their review of that agreement today. I think if we're going to let that theater go for all the reasons you know, that today, I think our theater go for all the simply the land. Speak for the rest of what I have to say, and thanks for letting me give some live comments.
Thank you, Casey.
Next, we have Jonathan Bates. Jonathan, you're unmuted. Jonathan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here and I'm unmuted. I'm just joining the meeting. I don't have any comments at this time.
Thank you. Next, we have Melanie Pearson. Melanie, you are unmuted. Melanie, are you there?
I'm here, but I'm not sure what I'm here for.
Are you here to?
I'm just listening in.
Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah.
Board Chair, we have no more speakers.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Casey, for providing general comment. Are there any other comments at all? You said nobody is there, correct? All right, and then we have no public hearings today, so we're moving on to item C1, which is approval of minutes. The board will approve the minutes of Tuesday, May 5th, 2020, and Tuesday, January 12th, 2021. Do we have Anybody
Madam
that
Chair, I
would
move
like?
we approve of those minutes.
Second.
Second. Right, we have approval of those meetings by Board Member Johnston and a second by Board Member Fowler. I will have to call a roll call this, correct? Jen? Yes, okay.
I think on these ones, yeah, I think that either way, let's see, did Allison Parks, oh, no. Either way on these, I think the ones that you definitely have to roll call are going into closed session and
Okay.
ending closed sessions.
Right, I was just going to roll call. So Board Member Fowler. Yes. Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Board Member Wharton.
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
Mano.
Yes.
James Rogers.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, a resolution adopting an updated RDA art policy. And at the table, we will have Danny Walls. And the board considered this in December, but because of concerns, it's on, again, to confirm the action today. So, Danny, do we have a quick update on that one?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the board. These next 2 items are exactly that. These are resolutions that the board did adopt in December due to noticing issues and then being bumped from the January agenda. They are before you today just for confirmation of that adoption as a formality, but obviously if there are any questions or details that you'd like us to provide, we're happy to do that.
Board members, any questions on items 2 or 3? We have the adopting and updated RDA art policy, and then item 3 is housing allocation policies.
And Madam Chair, we would just need a motion to, I think, ratify or confirm is the language. I apologize. We typically show motion sheets when you guys are getting ready to adopt, but because of all the issues with the VPN and CenturyLink, we are not able to show those motion sheets right now. So we're going to be kind of winging it. Apologies. So
Madam
we
Chair,
just need a motion from someone.
individually.
Okay. Board Member
We
Johnson.
do it individually.
Individually, right? Jen or Allison?
This is Allison. Yes, I would recommend that you guys do them individually.
Madam Chair, I would make a motion that we approve the RDA art policy.
Second.
We have a motion by Board Member Johnston and a second by Board Member Mano. All in favor, I guess. Oh, man, should we roll call this again? Fowler?
Yes.
Mano?
Yes.
Dugan?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Rogers?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Go ahead, Mr. Johnston.
I'm a yes too.
Sorry, Andrew. And so that passed unanimously. We do have a motion for resolution housing allocation policies.
And this is the same. We would just need a motion from someone to confirm the resolution.
Yes.
It's already been adopted.
Madam Chair, I would move that we ratify or confirm the housing allocation resolution.
Second.
Right, we have a motion by Board Member Fowler, seconded by Board Member Johnston.
Yes.
Fowler.
Yes.
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 Dugan.
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
Me too.
And Mano, man, I'm trying to, sorry you guys. Okay, I have it written down. So I'm following Chris's lead when he writes his down so I can name all of you. All right, so again, that passes unanimously. We're moving on to item 4, and this is an informational item about housing development loan program policy. At the table, we have council staff Allison Rowland, RDA staff Danny Waltz, and Tammy Hansaker. And
Thank you, Madam Chair. Allison, did you want to jump in first?
You know, I will just mention that I sent an email to board members probably yesterday, and I just resent it a few minutes ago, just following up on some questions that Chair Valdemoros and Vice Chair Dugan had on how the board might affect different interests in this proposed housing development loan program policy, or HDLP. So I just wanted to make sure you saw that. There are some potential policy questions down at the bottom of it, but I think it makes sense for Danny and Tammy to go ahead and give the full briefing.
Great.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn the time over directly to Tammy, who has the presentation to queue up and go through. And this is the ongoing conversation that we've had with the board and following up on the resolution you just passed for the housing funding policy. And Tammy, if you're ready, you can take it away.
Yes. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Moving on, so this discussion began actually a couple of years ago now, when the board provided some direction to RDA staff to adopt an RDA housing allocation funds policy, which is actually the policy you just adopted. And if you may remember, this is the policy that sets up the different housing accounts by source of fund. So we have tax increment that's mandatorily set aside for affordable housing in one fund, a discretionary tax increment fund, a fund for the Northwest Quadrant or the Inland Port housing monies, and then a fund for other city funds such as the sales tax fund. So the next step in this process is the policy that you have today in your packet. The policy resolution is in draft form. This is just a preliminary review and briefing, but the intent of this policy is to create that one-stop shop program for developers to actually access the funds. So on the back end, the housing development loan program will be funded by the different sources that are now set up through the policy you just adopted. But as far as the public goes and the developers go, it's just one program and one application and underwriting process to access. So diving into the details, we have the policy is really set up to be flexible on an annual basis. So how we've structured it is there are intent statements that are intended to be longer term to kind of live with the policy as time goes on. But we're proposing to bring an annual funding priority and allocation plan annually to the board. And this is because the city's housing plan is a 5-year housing plan. So that will change relatively often over time. And then also conditions and needs within the community change. So we want to be flexible with how we target funding on an annual basis. In addition, there could be strategic opportunities we want to focus on in one particular year. For example, if there is a property that the city or the RDA has been targeting for acquisition, that year we could set aside more funds for acquisition and a little bit less in the housing development loan program on an annual basis. So that funding strategy is actually set up in the policy you just adopted, but that's how funds will then be allocated to the housing development loan program. So I'm going to go through and read the intent statements. These are the overarching statements, but I think they're important to review in detail. And there's, I think, about 7 of them. The first one is provide a mix of affordable housing, serving a range of household and income levels, consistent with income limits and affordability requirements for each funding source to promote housing opportunity and choice throughout the city. Foster a mix of household incomes in projects and neighborhoods, and to disperse affordable housing projects throughout the city to achieve a balance of incomes in all neighborhoods and communities. Promote equity and anti-displacement efforts through the development and preservation of affordable housing in low-income neighborhoods where underserved groups have historic ties, including neighborhoods where low-income individuals and families are at high risk of displacement. Contribute to the development of sustainable, walkable neighborhoods to expand housing choice near transportation, services, and economic opportunity. Incorporate green building elements and energy efficiency to lower housing expenses, conserve resources, and promote resiliency. Leverage private and non-city funding sources to ensure the greatest number of quality affordable housing units are preserved or produced. Be provided as loans that are repaid over time and not grants, forgivable loans, or indefinite deferred loans. So those are the overarching intent statements. In terms of the administration process, funds are anticipated to be administered through a transparent notice of funding availability. And that notice of funding availability will incorporate priorities as set annually by the board. We can combine multiple funding sources into one NOFA, or for example, if one year we had a lot of funding from like the Inland Port or the Northwest Quadrant money that we wanted to target for a specific type of housing, we could issue one unique NOFA for that funding source. We're anticipating that NOFAs could be offered annually, just one time per year, do a big NOFA, or multiple times per year, depending on what we're targeting. The policy does have basic eligibility requirements. These are pretty standard, and a lot of the requirements point back to the requirements of the specific source of funding. Just the types of projects we will fund, the AMI. Applicants need to demonstrate a financial gap in the project and that gap is reasonable and necessary for the project to succeed. They have to have design control, meet the city's master plans and policies. If there is a relocation that's necessary, we would require a relocation plan that follows the Uniform Relocation Act. And then also the project would need to meet all of the RDA and the city's design standards. We have included in the policy underwriting standards by the type of project and the type of financing. So gap financing for rental projects, and this financing would be construction to permanent financing. So it would be longer term, 30 years. We would go down to a 1.10 debt service coverage ratio, which is typical of what the RDA has already been providing. And then we are proposing that loans, ideally for most projects, would be provided as hard debt service payments, meaning that the payments would be required on a monthly basis over time. But the policy does leave flexibility to provide cash flow loans for special projects that have a severe gap in financing and that serve a special need in the community. For example, really low AMI units or permanent supportive housing might require a cash flow loan. We're proposing the interest rate would be 3% if there's a hard debt service repayment, 4% for cash flow just because it's riskier. But we are proposing interest rate reductions that would be based on the annual funding priorities. So applicants, if they meet a lot of those interest rate reductions, they could get the interest rate down to a minimum of 1%. We're also looking at providing property acquisition loans. These would be shorter term loans up to 24 months. We would require that the maximum amount of assistance would be 90% of the loan to the appraised value of the current land. So we'd provide up to 90% of that at a 3% interest rate with the same ability to reduce the interest rate based on funding priorities as determined for that year. We are also proposing gap financing for home ownership projects, a little bit similar to the property acquisition structure. It would be a shorter term loan. This one would be 36 months. The repayment structure for this loan would be based on sales of the for-sale housing units. So the loan would be paid off as the developer sells the units. We have done this a couple of times recently, structured these loans with the RDA loan program, and it's a great way to help start assisting homeownership projects in the community. The standardized evaluation and approval process would include 4 steps, which would include first an eligibility review by RDA staff to make sure all those basic requirements are met. And then we would have all of the applications reviewed by a review committee that shall be comprised of experts and professionals in the field, as well as RDA and city staff. The review committee shall make a recommendation that is forwarded to the RDA board for consideration with the full application. So the RDA board does have full control to approve or deny applications. And then after applications are approved, the applicant would enter into a funding commitment with the RDA to move the project towards final closing. And of course, ongoing monitoring and compliance is a very important part of affordable housing loans. So we would be required to monitor or else contract with a third party to monitor the projects funded through the Housing Development Loan Program. We are currently in discussions with HAND on exactly the process and collaboration on how this will happen, because HAND has loans through some of their federal grant programs that would also need monitoring. So we're talking about collaboration and coordination on a larger scale between the two entities. And that is the end of my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Madam Chair. Tammy?
Yeah.
I have 2 questions for you. On the intent side of the house, you talked about sustainability and building requirements on the intent, and then we have design on the basic eligibility. Is there a need to have any intent on the green, on the sustainability and the pressing towards our 2030 of being whatever it is, zero energy or our energy efficiency? Is there a reason for having an intent? It should be all be just in the basic eligibility on the green design.
Yes, there could be. That's actually a discussion that we are engaging internally on, the level of sustainability requirements to require as a baseline threshold for projects going through the RDA. I don't think we've hit a clear path forward yet. We're still working through some of those details. Wouldn't you say, Danny? That's a discussion that will come back.
Yes, and I think to answer your question, Director Dugan, is I think it's both. I think the intent sets that high value of what our goals are, is always wanting to make sure that we include and strive for that high level of sustainability, while at the same time, as Tammy mentioned, we are having the conversations and probably bringing to the board what would be an overarching sustainability policy that would cover all of our programs and participation on a blanket application. And so I think it's always good to make sure that you state your values and what the intent is. And then at the same time, we always reference what the requirements are and any policy that then applies to these programs or funding.
Okay, thanks. My second question is on the affordable housing. Just as we saw in the theater affordable housing, you know, we asked developers for 10% of the affordable housing, and when we get the 10%, you know, 90% of them are all studios. And I'd really like to break it down more to percentage of unit size, because studio is great, but we need to start focusing on some families and, you know, single parent families who have a couple kids, and they're not going to be in a studio, they're going to be in a 1 or 2 bedrooms. So if we could more focus, maybe a little more specific on when we ask for affordable housing, break it down by unit size, not just percentage of the total volume.
I think that's a great suggestion. If the board wishes, I think we could modify the language in that intent statement so that it's not just encouraging a mix of household incomes, but it's a mix of household incomes also across unit types.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm just jumping in. Board Chair Valdemoros is having some serious technical issues, so she logged off and is going to try to log back on to see if that helps. So surprise to Vice Chair Dugan. Now, if you could just see if anyone else has questions. Oh, there she is. We'll see. Anna, you are muted. I wonder if this was one of the challenges she was having last time.
Right.
Mr. Vice Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Mano.
Is it okay if I start while Anna's getting situated? I had a couple questions. One on the interest rate. Is that static then, and we update that every year? Because right now a 3% interest rate maybe isn't that great, whereas typically a 3% interest rate is pretty good, and some years it might be very good. How does that change from year to year? Do we, as a board, readjust that, or is it somehow fixed to the index?
That is a great question, and something that we thought a lot about. The 3% interest rate came from what the Housing Trust Fund currently does. The RDA in general, we usually tie our interest rate to the US Treasury yield, but in doing research across other housing trust fund programs across the nation, for some reason, a lot of housing programs have a static interest rate, and it's something we can think, the policy is still very much in draft form. We can think through a little bit, because I agree with you. It seems like it should somehow be tied to a market index. So we can go back and take a look at that. But to answer your question, it's kind of the current practice of the Housing Trust Fund right now.
Yeah, I would advocate for a rethinking of that, just because interest rates have fluctuated so much, and right now they're so historically low that maybe our program's not that attractive, whereas in other years it might be very attractive, and maybe they won't do any of the additional interest rate reduction sort of benchmarks that we want them to do, because the 3% is already so low. So I just think that the program is going to be more or less effective depending on the year, not the way that we structured the program if we have a static interest rate. So I'd be interested in seeing what that would look like. My second question is, I remain somewhat concerned about how our housing policies and how the agency is supporting development at all scales. And I know that we've talked about this before, and that within the policy, the NOFA could be written to sort of ask for different types of housing. But at what point does the board have that policy discussion as to what the NOFA is going to look like that year? And am I understanding that right, where the policy that we're discussing today is intended to be flexible, and if we want to prioritize smaller scale versus larger scale one year over the other, that's built into the policy? I'm just not clear as to when we would have that discussion as to how we want to write the NOFA in order so that we can target multiple development scales, because I think that's important both for the urban fabric, but also as an agency, we're supporting the development of housing, but we're also supporting the sort of financial betterment of projects. So I think that I guess I'm just confused as to when we would have that conversation. Could you help me understand that, please?
Yeah, the way we envision the process working is that RDA staff would bring the housing, the annual housing strategy to the board before the budget process begins. So it could be a discussion that happens around the spring of each year, and then the final budget approval would still happen in the budget process. But I imagine there would be a separate resolution that would be approved with the funding priorities for that year. And then after the budget is approved is when it would be an administrative function that we would then write a NOFA according to those priorities and issue the NOFA. But I do hear what you're saying about the different scale of development. And I do think if the board is interested, we could also work that into that intent language, so that even though we're not saying anything specific about funding allocations on an ongoing annual basis, we could have an intent in this overarching policy.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm interested in that. And I guess one of the things that I keep thinking about when we talk about this is, given that we could issue that NOFA either annually or multiple times throughout the year, I think smaller scale projects might not work on an annual timeline, because the project doesn't have a year to wait for the next funding opening. If it doesn't work at that time, it's just not going to be able to use one of our loan policies for smaller projects, whereas much larger projects have years and years to go through that, and they have that 1 year schedule would work. So that's, I think, where my concern comes in.
And if I could jump in
Thanks.
as well, Director Mono, I think Tammy's probably the expert on this, but I think the other possibility to consider as part of setting those funding priorities and allocations, depending on how we want to define or encourage the smaller scale development, that may not be a NOFA at all. That may be a line item allocation for something like, encouraging ADUs, or an entirely different track of how we make funding available for whatever priority you set as a board. So it doesn't always have to necessarily be part of the NOFA. It can be, but based on what we want to target, you have a few different options. And when you set that funding priority and those allocations, you can provide that direction.
Can I ask you a question, Darren? What scale are you imagining for an envision price, I guess? Or
I think I'm thinking, for instance, well, I know we haven't approved it yet, but things that would fall under like that new RMF 30, where it might be a fourplex or something. And if we could get half of those as affordable, we can build that sort of missing middle housing, but also hit affordability with that. And I'm just worried that traditional banks might have a hard time underwriting some of these new housing types that we're potentially allowing within our city. And so it seems like the agency might be a good place to fill that funding gap for projects that are potentially new or untested.
So we probably have to advertise. I can't, maybe they'll approach us one by one and we'll put something in as a line item, but it sounds like we're going to have to advertise something to get it out in the public. Is that in your head as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to advertise all of our programs though, right? To make sure that it's out to the public.
And we could also treat it as an open-ended NOFA that doesn't have a time limitation, which is what we've done with the high opportunity funds, because those projects you see less often, they're more difficult to structure. So it's not like a shorter, like a 60-day open application window. It's kind of a longer pot of money that's available for people to access as a project comes forward.
I like that idea a lot, particularly when we think about, I'm thinking about the 9-line CRA, where it's not zoned for large development, so the lots are small, it's residential. And I think it would make sense in some areas to target certain amounts of this money to certain types of developments like Darren's talking about. I can see that being very helpful in some areas.
All right. Anybody else have a question about this piece?
Madam Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
along similar lines, when we talk affordable housing, we just use it as a generic conversation. But again, along a lot of times it's 80% or less. Do we ever, or when do we discuss, hey, we want to have X amount of units that are 40% or less, 60% or less, 80% or less, and how do we get that out? Because I'm unsure of any of those decisions and when we make those.
Yes, that's a good question. I have the same question. So Danny, like when can we have those conversations, or is it something that we set in policy like right now, or is it a case by case, or how do you envision that the affordability discussion and implementation when we give out loans?
I think that's a great question. I think that's one of the things we struggle with the most. And Tammy can jump in here because she probably has some even better thoughts than I do. But for us, it starts first and foremost at the city's housing plan, and obviously building off of what the intent and priorities are that you as a council determine for the city in general. And then we obviously recognize that every project is different. And so within those nuances within the distinct projects, that's where we try to provide the flexibility of how we may or may not participate in a loan and what we are then receiving as a benefit for our participation. But then as it relates to this policy, you very much have the opportunity to set those priorities every year with the funding. That is what is really good with this policy, is we are setting those overarching goals and intents as they align with the city's plan, as well as our project area plans. And then we are providing that ability to be flexible based on either what we're seeing as a gap or what is not being brought forth in the market, or what we just feel as a city we want to prioritize and then put our funding towards. And so to answer your question, Director Dugan, that would come to you as part of our report. That would be obviously part of the metrics that we hope to provide to you as a board to help inform you of what is happening, what the agency has participated in, also what we're seeing as maybe those sensitive points within the market. And then that's where we can have a discussion with you of what we want to prioritize, what are the pros and cons of that, where we think we're going to get the most success. And then you as a board can then determine where you want to put the funding, and whether you want to do that as a NOFO, a program, open-ended funding source, or anything else we can come up with. That is where we really are trying to design this to where we can be more responsive and more successful with how we're putting our money out on the street. Tammy, tell me what I got wrong.
Well, you didn't get anything wrong, but I would add that 80% AMI sounds quite high, but if we're targeting homeownership 1 year or with a set aside, 60 to 80% AMI is where you're going to be at to get that homeownership project implemented. But Danny's right, we can tailor the AMIs or allocate a specific amount of funding to go for like 30% AMI, 40% AMI on an annual basis.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking of the 40% AMI, not for home ownership. It was more on the rental side. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And I have a question on that. I think on your presentation, Tammy, I think it was, I'm not sure if it's item 7, I think, or not, which item it was, but when you said we're gonna have to monitor this, from what I hear from the community is that we haven't, like the city hasn't been able to really enforce or enforce on these affordable units if we give loans and maybe these affordable units are not happening or happen for a little bit, but then they go back to market rate for rental. So what's the mechanism? How are we going to make sure that these affordable units are actually being built and being utilized, and for whatever period it is? How do we know that it's actually happening?
Yeah, that monitoring and compliance should take place annually. And those projects that have low-income housing tax credits in them, the state department that oversees those tax credits does a very thorough monitoring annually of those projects, and we always require access to those reports. So the trickier ones are the more creative ones that we've been funding that don't have any other source of affordable housing in them. So we need to develop a better system to do that monitoring and compliance on an annual basis. So we're in the process of working that out with hand. But to date, to be honest, most of the projects that have been constructed and are in place are those tax credit projects that have been being monitored by a different agency. So we're just coordinating on how to be better at our own projects and moving forward with those. I think I would defer to Allison on what legal remedies we have if they do default, but it's my understanding that, so for every affordable housing project, we record a restrictive use agreement. And that restrictive use agreement runs the length of the affordability period, which is typically 50 years. Our loans are typically for affordable housing around 30 years. So if they aren't doing the things they should be doing with affordable housing compliance during the term of the loan, that would be a default on the loan. And there are different remedies that are legal processes we could go through with the loan. After the loan is paid off, it's a little bit more difficult, but there is still that restrictive use agreement that is tied to the land.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Tammy. Tammy obviously did a great job of explaining that. The only thing that I'll add to what Tammy said is that in addition to the restrictive use agreements, most of the loans also have a restrictive use and right to repurchase. And the right to repurchase is an enforcement mechanism that the RDA has to ensure that those affordability benchmarks are being met. But I will say those also apply to other public benefits that the RDA requested. So for example, with the 255 State Street project that we just closed on, there was an affordability piece, but there was also the public access easement and the historic renovation and activation of the Kramer House. And all of that was recorded in a restrictive use agreement and right to repurchase.
So what you're saying is that we do have a legal recourse. Do you guys feel that that's sufficient so that we do get these affordable housing units for as long as has been agreed upon? Or is there anything else we can do to send a message that we're serious, like we really want our dollars to go to the affordable housing units, and that they stay like that for as long as we need it to be? Or do you think this is good enough, the system that we have right now?
Yeah, we could talk about this more too. I think it's kind of a complicated issue. It is a very strong tool that the city has and the RDA has to repurchase a piece of property after someone's already developed it. That's a pretty big tool that we have. But it's complicated because we're also navigating the relationship that the lenders have with or the borrowers have with other lenders. So we have to make sure that we're not that we're giving the other lenders an opportunity to cure or correct anything as well. So.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. I think we're way past. We're like 11 minutes past this item. Anything else from anybody else? If I don't see or hear anybody, we'll move on to number 5. Thank you, Tammy and Allison and Danny for that. Allison's for that. Let's move on to item number 5. It's an informational item as well. Disposition of real property for Block 70, project area development, the Walker Center follow-up. So this one is something that we needed to, last meeting we needed to take action, but then things have changed and we wanted to make sure that we explain to the public what changed and why we don't have to take action. So that's why Danny is gonna explain the process.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. And you framed it very well that this was an item that came before the board last month. This is regarding the parcel of property that the agency owns, essentially under the Walker Center parking garage on Regent Street. It's just over 3,000 square feet. And you'll recall that last month we brought before the board consideration for a resolution that would essentially approve the write down of the property as per our disposition terms. We were proposing that the purchase price and the discount be approved in consideration of a perpetual easement in favor of the agency for what is the utilization of the property for our trash compactor and backup generator that serves the Eccles Theater. We also felt that it was practical and that it was allowing the property owner to consolidate ownership of the property that is directly under their building while obviously protecting the agency's continued use of it. The board, as part of their discussion, chose to table the item. However, in our follow-up conversations and negotiation with the property owners, they have indicated that taking into consideration the board's desire that this move forward in a more market rate transaction, that they have proposed to purchase now the western portion of that property at fair market value, which is essentially $9,500. The reason the value is so low is because it is encumbered with a perpetual easement that really just serves our purpose for the compactor and the generator. Also keep in mind that Walker Center already owns the air rights above the parcel. So you're really just dealing with that small space, and that's why the value is so low. But what this does is this no longer requires board action for approval. But as you mentioned, Madam Chair, we wanted to circle back and close the loop in terms of where this transaction is going now, and that it does not need any additional steps or action from the board, but we wanted to notify you of where we're at with that negotiation and that we are looking to move forward with closing on the property by the end of the month. I should also note that as part of the discussion and negotiations with the property owner, the transaction for both pieces now is a fair market value for both parcels. They are going to grant us that perpetual easement for the eastern parcel. And they're also going to allocate additional space for the agency for the use of storage to serve the McCarthy Plaza there on the theater property. They will continue their obligation to build out the eastern parcel for a lease by a local food and beverage provider. And then we have also provided within that the opportunity that once they build out, if for whatever reasons they are not able to lease the space, that we as an agency have an option to lease that and make sure that it's activated. And so beyond that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, or Allison, who's been involved in this as well, can provide any insight on the status.
Go ahead, Dan.
Danny, just one clarification. It was not 9,500, but 95,000?
No, 9,500. The value, because of the air rights already being purchased above it, and then the fact that it's right now being utilized for the trash compactor and the generator, and we will continue to hold a perpetual easement. It really has almost zero value for the property owner because they can't essentially do anything with it.
Okay.
Anybody else? Nope. Okay. Thanks, Danny. We'll
Thank
move
you.
on to item number 6. It's informational. It's the update on sales pricing terms of the Utah Theater and adjacent retail property at 144-158 South Main Street. At the table, it's Danny, Tammy, and Lauren Parisi.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn it directly over to Tammy and Lauren, who have a presentation to provide some background to the board on the project, as well as update on the terms for that disposition, and then some additional detail on one of the contingencies. So, Tammy, whenever you're ready.
All right. Let me share my screen. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. Since it's been a while since we have reviewed the Utah Theater, or the board has reviewed the Utah Theater, I thought I'd give a little bit of context. Here is the site. This is Main Street. Utah Theater is the property in red. The adjacent property owners are Heinz and 160 Main LLC. Our property is a total of 0.89 acres in the D1 district. It was back in 2010 that the RDA actually acquired the property with the thought that it potentially could be used as the site of the Salt Lake City Performing Arts Center, which is now the Eccles Theater that ended up being sited across the street. So from 2010 through 2016, we explored various preservation and reuse options in collaboration with different consultants and interested user groups. Solidified anything, so in 2015 we engaged property owners to explore a partnership on redevelopment of the property. And this was for several reasons, one of which is the site is landlocked and constrained in terms of access. So we began that collaboration with property owners, and in 2018, the RDA determined that it was very cheap to build barriers, including the significant public benefit or public investment that would be required to bring the structure up to current building and seismic code, as well as the lack of a viable end user. So in 2019, Heinz, acting as the lead developer, proposed the construction of a mixed-use tower that is approximately 370 feet high with commercial and residential uses and includes affordable housing, public space, historic repurposing of theater elements, structured parking, and public art. So it was December 3rd of 2019, the board approved a resolution authorizing the sales pricing terms of the land write down for the property, so long as certain public benefits are incorporated into the project. Those public benefits include affordable housing. A minimum of 10% of the units shall be affordable to 80% AMI to 60% AMI. A mid-block walkway off of Main Street that extends into the interior of the block, and historic repurposing and reclamation of theater elements. In addition, the board added on 2 contingencies: an open space contingency confirming that the developer intends to build green open space in addition to the mid-block walkway as part of the project, and prior to closing, the developer return with detailed plans and cost estimates to construct the open space, ensure that it is publicly accessible, and maintain the open space. The open space, or the park space, which is contemplated to be on top of the parking structure, has always been an ongoing negotiation between the developer and the RDA in terms of the level of design and public accessibility. So while it is required, the resolution contingency also says that prior to closing, the board may consider providing incentives to the developer or through the city council relating to the open space. So that's the contingency regarding historic documentation. Prior to demolishing the RDA must ensure that the historic elements are documented through measured drawings and or written data, and provide this detailed record to the board, which is what we are here to do today. But first, just touching on the open space, Heinz, the developer, is prepared to fulfill this contingency and will return to the board at a later date with detailed plans for the open space. But the RDA sees the open space as a great way to look at this project really as a model for a public-private partnership to encourage and promote open space in the central business district. We did talk internally with other divisions and departments, and due to the context of this particular open space being on the top of the parking structure, it has been determined that it's more appropriate that the park space remain privately owned and maintained rather than part of the city's open space inventory. But we are working with the developer on, there will be an easement requiring public access on the public space. So that's just a little teaser to what will come at a future meeting. But the real intent of our briefing today is to get into the historic documentation, which Lauren will go through. And I can flip through your slides, Lauren.
Great, thank you, Tammy. So can everyone see the first slide or?
Yes.
Yes, I guess
Okay,
it's the
here we
one.
go.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, so in March of 2020, the RDA released the request for proposals for the historic documentation of the Utah Theater, as Tammy described, was a contingency of the land sale. And just as a reference, the Utah Theater is historically known as the Pantages Theater, named after the original property owner, Alexander Pantages, who was a theater mogul in the area. So the theater is kind of used as the Utah Theater and the Pantages interchangeably. So we received multiple great proposals to complete this work, and the selection committee ultimately chose local design firm Modern Out West, and they started their documentation work inside the theater in July of 2020. So as a part of this project, Modern Out West was able to update the intensive level survey for the property to the State Historic Preservation Office's standards. And this included a lot of research and compiling of historic records. They produced different types of experimental drawings, such as watercolors and charcoal drawings. They also produced more traditional architectural drawings of the building, which were completed to HABS, or the Historic American Building Survey standards. The theater was extensively photographed by professional photographers on Modern Out West team. There was drone video footage taken inside the theater. A 3D scan was produced of the building, and we've archived the associated CloudPoint data set. And a virtual reality tour was also created from that. So next slide. So all of the archives were submitted to the Utah State Historic Preservation Office, where they're currently in the process of digitizing all their historic building files to be hosted by the University of Utah's Marriott Library. So the public can search for the information that was created on the Marriott's archive system. And then Modern Out West also created an independent website, the Pantages Theater Archive, that features a lot of the archive material that they created as a part of this project, as well as kind of more anecdotal information about the Pantages Theater, a timeline of its construction and life, and things of that nature. And then finally, the archive material will also be accessible internally on the city's Laserfiche system. So I highly recommend that you all check out the website, the interactive website that was created by Modern Out West. It's really great, and we're really grateful to Modern Out West for not only producing a substantial amount of archives, not worry forever, but in the interest of time, I can some of the pieces that they created as a part of this project. So Tammy, if you could flip to the next slide.
Sorry, Lauren, your screen might have a delay. The watercolor.
Yeah, I think I do. I think I do. So they created some watercolor drawings. As you see here, I can't see them, but hopefully you see them. And then the second type of experimental drawings was the charcoal drawings. And I think that you'll see the Pantages Theater emblem on a stair baluster is up. Oh, now I see the watercolors. And then the next should be the charcoal drawings.
Yeah, the charcoal drawing is up.
And then we can switch to the next set of drawings, and I believe it's the architectural drawings. And there's an architectural plan site for the entire building. So they have building sections, a site plan, building elevations. They also have historic building elevations and current building elevations. And then they've produced analytics and more architectural drawings for the smaller significant architectural details. And so it's quite an extensive plan set. And then I think next is a lot of the photography that they created or that they took. And so there's different types of photography. And they also collected a lot of the historic photos, and those have been made a part of the interactive website. And then I think I can't see this, I apologize, but I think the last slide I had was just some of the different experimental photography they had with single exposure photos. So hopefully you could kind of see a sampling of the type of archives that were created. And again, if you want to take a look at that interactive website, you can do the virtual reality tour and walk through the theater and things of that nature. So I think that's about it. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Board members, do you have any other questions? Go ahead, Mr. Wharton.
Uh-oh, is Chris having the same? Let's see. Chris, try to unmute one more time. We had a weird meeting setting that was making it so that Councilmember Fowler couldn't unmute earlier, and I'm not sure if it's related to CenturyLink or WebEx or both. Oh, there we go.
Yay. So who owns, like in the pictures that we've seen, you know, like the banister and the chandelier and all of that stuff that's in the theater, do we own that, or is that part of the sale to Heinz? And my second question is, what can we do if it's ours? How can it be salvaged or stored or something like that?
I can take a shot at that. Oh, well, really quick with the land sale. With the land sale, one of the required elements of the historic purposing and reuse. Another study was done that was led by the developer that identified historic features that could be reclaimed and reused in the new structure. So that is an ongoing negotiation that Heinz and the Rda staff are working through. And those elements that Heinz will reclaim and reuse in the new development will be included in the agreements when we close. But as far as the other elements, I know Lauren's been working with different user groups who are interested.
Yeah, Modern Out West, the consultants that we were working with, they have connections or connections with other universities that might be interested in going into the theater and salvaging additional pieces once the land sale occurs. So I've put them in touch and they're talking about how they can accomplish that.
Well, would that mean like that those universities would take it? Is there a way to keep that salvage stuff here in Salt Lake?
We haven't explored the city keeping those pieces, but I think that's something that we could if we wanted to.
And what will the board's role be in those discussions when those things are finalized at the end? Will the board be part of that, or will that all be done by the administration?
I believe that is all an administrative function. If Allison wants to chime in, we could definitely provide the board an update on that process as it moves forward.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
at a minimum, I would want to know what is happening to what, because that's been a big part of what the community has asked of us as the board is, you know, what will we do with the stained glass or this, you know, the stained glass ceiling or some of those other things. And I want to get that information out to them.
We can definitely follow up with a board briefing, but was my interpretation correct, Allison? It's an administrative function?
yeah, most of this is already dictated by the purchase and sale agreement, that's already in place and executed between. Yeah, most by the purchase and sale agreement, that's already in place. Further negotiation between the two parties.
Function.
Will be used and available for some sort of purpose in some other area. That's
Chris, is that for you?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
all I have.
Anyone else have questions about this project? I don't see any.
Madam Chair.
Yeah,
I don't have a question. I just want to echo what Chris is saying. This is really important. This decision was obviously made before I was on the board, but I think it's really sad that we're losing the structure, and whatever we can do to do the best to preserve some of the elements, I think it's at least a small consolation prize. So I'll add my voice to Chris's in terms of advocating for reuse of those, especially in a way that's accessible to the public would be ideal.
Great. Thank you. If we are good to move on to other questions, I had some about the accessibility to the new park. How do you guys envision? Let me see some questions here. What the conduct will be? I mean, who's allowed at the park? What things are allowed at the park? Is it publicly accessible? How long will it be accessible for? Is it perpetually, or do we have a time frame? So there's a bunch of questions. I mean, we're going to have special events, public ones, or private ones where the park is just closed to the public. How do you guys think?
We are teeing up a larger discussion on the park at a future board meeting, but I just briefly can say that what we've talked about with the developer is placing time, place, and manner regulations on the park, which I believe the city does on its own park space. So like hours of operation, that sort of thing. All of that will still comply with the First Amendment, and there will be a public easement placed on the park space.
Okay. Anybody else? Go ahead, Dugan.
Also, back to the affordable housing side of the house, there was just concerns that the size of the affordable housing units was smaller than the market rate units. Is that just a rumor? Is that true? And how does that play into the design of the building?
I think we can, oh, sorry, Tammy, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that we're working on getting confirmation from the developer, the unit mix.
But I'll jump in for Tammy and her barking dog. We are, as follow-up to earlier conversations with the developer, we will provide that information on how they're proposing to mix those affordable units within the different unit type sizes. It is obvious our preference that they don't do it where they're just all studio apartments, and the developers indicated that's not their intention. But we can follow up with what that final proposed mix is for you.
And also the square footage. So they should all, I would think that should all be about the same size.
Yeah, I think as they indicated, they have a pretty set floor plan for the bulk of the floors as far as the unit mix on each floor. And so we would hope and anticipate that they don't necessarily change the square footage for the units that are designated as affordable. But we will follow up on that and make sure we provide that information.
All right. So Danny, if nobody else has any questions, I would like Danny to just give us a little bit of a timeline of with this project, in terms of when we're gonna get those answers. Are we gonna have the applicant at a future meeting, and that would be our last meeting? I mean, what's the process from now on? What's left over?
Great question. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to that. The developer is working on a deadline of when some of their money goes hard as part of their transaction, and that is happening at the end of March. They obviously have been working with us to fulfill these two contingencies that are part of the overall approval by the board. First contingency is obviously the completion of this project we just showed you of the archival information. The second part is showing the design and the plans for the park space, as well as what the associated costs are for that, to build it at different levels based on what level this board wants to see that as far as public accessibility, the improvements themselves, and any participation for the maintenance of that. So it is our intention to have those discussions with board members and bring that to the board in March as far as an overall design, as well as the information of what that design would equate to in terms of potential financial participation if the board chose to do that. Obviously, the developers would love to have some sense of answer or discussion on that going into their deadline at the end of March. We have informed them, obviously, that we may not be able to take action or provide any of that, but they're hoping to at least present that so that they can fulfill that contingency as part of the resolution. So shortly after their deadline in March, we would start working with them for closing. And Tammy, you can jump in if you have better memory of this, but our closing is contingent on them submitting the application for the height request and variance that they are working on, as well as the overall design and approval that we have as part of our purchase and sale agreement. So we don't have that date set yet for closing, since it's based on kind of the timing for that request for the height, but that is what we're working towards.
Okay. So Danny, if that happens before we look at the park, does this transaction still go without us looking at the park options? And then we talk about the park options after, or is it before? Do we need to make a decision before and then you close?
No, that's a great question, and probably should be clarified. As part of the resolution approval by the board for the write-down, we will present the park plans and the design. Any decision by the board for participation on that does not necessarily have to happen by closing, but we are required at least to present what the developer is proposing to build. And then we have the opportunity to continue that discussion to whatever extent you may want to participate or see that design expanded upon. But as far as the closing, to fulfill the requirements that approved the land write-down, we do need to present that design and fulfill that contingency so that as we do work towards closing, we have certainty on what that purchase price is and that the write-down is in effect. But that does not necessarily mean that you can't continue to have a conversation on what involvement there may be on the park.
Okay, thank you.
I think practically speaking, though, I'll just chime in that if the board has serious concerns about the different options and doesn't feel comfortable with any of them, obviously that would be the time to say it, because the ship would have sailed. You know, if you've already closed and then you're talking about totally changing the park options, right? So like, if for some reason you object to it being on the top of the parking structure, right? Like that would be a pretty important thing for the developer to know ahead of time. So, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, great. Go ahead if you have.
Well, actually, I was going to jump in and just clarify that the resolution itself does call for the board of directors or city council providing those incentives for the open space prior to closing.
I think it's like that's assuming that the board or city council decides to provide incentives, right? But those are optional.
Yeah, that's
okay.
I did want to chime in with just one technical update, because this has been such a fun day of internet problems. Apparently our internet feed to Facebook and YouTube because the CenturyLink's problems and because it's going through our city feed, which is CenturyLink, none of your cameras are showing up as being on. And so I'm saying this mostly for the benefit of the people who are listening to the meeting and see a bunch of gray tiles, that we will figure out a way to post the WebEx version of this meeting so that people in the public can rewatch it with all of the videos. I think that on one platform, the shared screen still worked, but not trusting that. So apologies, and know that we've just been in fun all day and we're working on fixing it. So thanks.
So, Jen, you're telling me to put lipstick on for nothing?
I know, right? You guys should at least get credit for having your cameras on, right? Okay, sorry.
I thought Jen was going to say we were going to have to do the whole meeting over again.
No.
Anyway, going back to item number 6, anything else on any other clarification, board members, that you'd like on the Utah Theater project? No? All right, then we're gonna move on to item number 7, which is a motion meeting remotely without an anchor location. The board will consider a motion to ratify the determination that the board will continue to meet remotely and without an anchor location under HB 5002.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Great. Do we have a second? Great. We have a
Second.
motion by board member Johnston and a second by board member Mano. And I think I'll just roll call real quick. Rogers, Johnston,
Yes.
Yes.
Wharton,
Yes.
Mano,
Yes.
Yes.
Fowler.
Yes.
Did I say Rogers? Okay.
But you'll also need to.
I said everyone but
you'll
you.
have to have your vote too.
Great, and I'm a yes. Great. Moving on to item number 8, report and announcements from executive director. Danny?
I do not see the mayor jumping on here, so I don't believe we have any reports from her.
All right. Thank you. Number 9, report and announcement from RDA staff.
Yes, Madam Chair, I just want to inform you and the rest of the board. I'd sent you an email for distribution to the board members earlier that provides this list and breakdown of the recipients and the amounts. I apologize that we did not send that sooner. We didn't have any staff reports, and so I wasn't tracking this item. And so until I saw it today, I didn't realize that that had been put on there. But we have emailed that. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has that on that list, or we can follow up at a later date. But we've transmitted that info.
Great, thank you. Anybody? Questions about that? All right. Danny, is that?
That is all we have for today. Thank you.
Okay, so item number 10, report of the chair and vice chair. That will be me and Mr. Dan Dugan. I just wanted to thank you for your patience today as we did this first meeting and having all these internet troubles. I don't have any specifics on RDA reports, but I did want to just recognize the work of Mr. Greg Mikulash, which passed away last week. He was a great asset to our city. He worked for building services, and the city's at a great loss for Greg, for his work, but also friendships that he has throughout the city and the city staff. So our condolences to his family. I'm really sad about that. He was a great asset to our city. And then on more happier news, I just wanted to show you guys a picture of this RDA. I don't know if you can see it, of this RDA fan. Oh, I don't know if you can see it. He has a little onesie that says Salt Lake City RDA. So anyway, thank you RDA staff for the little onesie and the gift.
That is great. We can start him in a job training program if you like right away.
All right. Let's do it. Yeah, he needs to contribute. Item D is written briefings. Let's see, the following briefings are informational in nature. Additional information can be provided to the board upon request. So we have number one, the informational, the University of Utah Research Park Project Area Creation Update. And I'm not sure if you were able to listen to that. Do you hear it?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think the goal was to provide this as a written update this month so that board members could take a look at it and figure out if it warranted sort of a more broader conversation. But it's just an update from RDA staff on the status.
All right. And we can connect with RDA staff about that in small groups, correct?
Yes, we plan on having those conversations and bringing that to the board at some point, but this was the beginning of just giving an update and setting that conversation.
All right, one moment. Item E, it's consent. The resolution amending 9-line community reinvestment project area budget.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the consent
Second.
agenda.
Motion by board member Fowler and second by Johnston. No, Rogers?
That was Roger.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, roll call. Fowler? Johnston?
Yes.
Wharton?
Yes.
Yes.
Dugan?
Yes.
Mano?
Yes.
Rogers?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay. And then I'm not sure if we have a closed session.
We do not this
Okay.
month.
So I guess that's the end of our meeting. Thank you so much for listening today, and hopefully we'll see you next time, or you'll see us next time.
And Madam Chair, we would typically do a motion to adjourn, and then we can check in too with the, this is a good time to check in with the council chair to see what kind of break, if any, we want to wait to sign into the next link. So.
Right. First, motion to adjourn.
Madam Chair, I motion we adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
By Johnston and second by Dugan. And then, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. We are scheduled on our agenda for our work session to begin at 3:45. So to stick with the agenda so we don't get too far off of it, since that was what was noticed, everyone gets a 15-minute break. So be back into our work session at 3:45, please.
We still need to adjourn. We didn't vote on that.
We got to vote to adjourn.
Can
Madam Chair.
we do a thumbs up, or do we? That's up to them, Madam.
Katie actually reminded me that taking a roll call would be helpful, and I think especially given our video feed problems, we probably should do that. Sorry.
Okay, so motion by Amy Fowler, seconded by James Rogers to adjourn. Roll call. Fowler.
Yes.
Johnston.
Yes.
Wharton.
Yes.
Mano.
Yes.
Rogers.
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
I'm a yes. Are we good?
That's great. Thanks, everyone.
All right. See you in 15 minutes.